For a Good Time Call by Popatochisps. Chapter 1. Prologue. Curiosity. You weren't quite sure what to make of the new guy. When your boss had bullied you into using some of your vacation days, you hadn't been thrilled. You'd protested, actually. You didn't have anywhere you wanted to go, and no social life to speak of, and the animals needed you. There was always so much to be done at the shelter, and you prided yourself as one of their most dedicated full-timers. If there was a dog needing a walk or a cat screaming for some dinner, you were right there with a smile and some silly baby talk, ready to take care of it. Pets were your passion, and nothing made you happier than to help out the ones that hadn't found their forever homes just yet. But maybe you were working a bit too hard. As the shelter manager was quick to point out, you were going on 3 years without a full day off, and no matter how much you loved the work, burnout was a thing that happened to people and not something she wanted to happen to her best worker. Flattery, your Achilles heel. She insisted on a break, no less than a week, and since you were so worried about the animals, she'd even tried to get a couple extra volunteers to keep things covered while you were out. You caved in and had a frustratingly great week at home doing absolutely nothing, and then went back to work where the same amount of nothing had caught fire in your absence. Everything was totally fine, great even, thanks to the irreproachable work of the newest volunteer your manager had dug up. "Hey, where'd you want these again?" You turned, jumping just a little when you came face to sternum with the man himself. He was staring down at you from his considerable height, his single brick-red eye large and glowing as he waited for your answer, probably about the 3 pallets of kibble he had slung over his shoulder. "Oh, you can just put those over by the dog room. I'll take it from there." You smiled at him, hoping you looked friendly. "Thanks for getting them. I can never reach without the stepladder." He just shrugged. "It's cool. I got it." And then he was off, moving far quieter than you thought a skeleton of his massive size should be able to. Then again, it's not like you knew many skeletons. It was just Sans. Monsters had come up to the surface only a year ago. Creatures of magic emerging from the depths of the earth like out of a fantasy novel, but all too real. Humanity was collectively horrified and demanded an immediate response to their arrival, governments from all over the world snapping into action faster than any bureaucracy had moved in centuries. And you were so proud of your dumb species for the first time in a long time. The appalling conditions of the underground and the hunched and broken bodies of the monsters who emerged from it had triggered a visceral, emotional response in nearly everyone who saw them. In an outpouring of pity and compassion, monsters were quickly granted legal rights, facilitated access to very necessary health care, both physical and psychological, and even regular stipends from relief fund donations to help them establish stable lives. It was true humanitarianism at its finest. People banding together to right a terrible wrong, and it warmed your heart to see it happen. There were dissenters, of course, bigots here and there who thought monsters were evil and should have died underground, especially after what was done to the humans who had fallen down there. But Queen Undyne, the monster monarch, had taken full responsibility for all of those deaths already. Even now, she was serving out her prison sentence for it, so it wasn't as if justice wasn't being done just because her people weren't locked up with her. You may not have known all the details, but you didn't think you needed to, and your opinion was one shared by the majority. Humans put them down there, and humans should make it better. Monsters were owed at least that much. Even in spite of the government money they were receiving, the grateful monsters who were physically able seemed quite happy to return the kindness given to them, entering the human workforce wherever they could, and giving back as productive members of their new society. That was the category that seemed to best fit Sans. When you'd first come back to work, he'd been a little bit of a shock, to say the least. Going to say hi to all the cats you hadn't seen in days, and finding a towering and frankly terrifying death omen standing silently amongst them had actually really rattled you. You had frozen just a little, transfixed by his blazing eyelight and the jagged, gaping hole in his skull that looked positively grisly. It wasn't until your manager came in behind you, introducing him to you as the new volunteer, that you noticed that the death omen was wearing a fuzzy hoodie and a frankly adorable pair of novelty skull slippers, and you realized how rude you'd been. Things had gotten busy, as they always did. Litter boxes to scrub, animals to socialize, families to interview. And you kind of lost track of him, but you did ask around. Sans? Nice guy. A little bit of a scatterbrain maybe, but I've seen worse, was the endorsement from a longtime coworker of yours. I've never had to show him something more than twice, so, he's already better than Michael. God, remember Michael? He kinda creeps me out, another volunteer told you. But the animals love him. One time, I saw him carrying around that big Rottweiler in one arm like it was a baby or something, and she was totally cool with it. He's been great so far, your manager had promised. I think you two will work really well together. Oh, yeah, sure. If he didn't think you were a total monster-phobic jerk by now. You'd spent basically every day since you'd been back, in between actual work, trying to talk to Sans. Not to apologize for freezing like a scared deer, the window for that was probably way past, but you could be better going forward, right? If you were actually nice and showed some manners better than a wild boar's, you could be friends, right? Wrong. So wrong. You discovered quickly that Sans was as much of an enigma as he was deceptively scary. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was quiet and to the point, never anything about himself. It actually hurt your feelings a little bit at first, until you learned that it didn't seem to be personal. Nobody at the shelter seemed to know anything about Sans. Even the big boss maxed out at knowing he just showed up one day asking to be put to work. If anything, though, learning that just made you all the more determined to befriend him. Sans was a mystery, and the less you realized you knew about him, the more driven you felt to figure him out. Who is this skeleton in comfy clothes who comes in most days and works hard for no money and barely says a word to anyone? You wanted to find out, even as it was proving just as hard as herding cats. Harder, probably. The cats usually pay pretty good attention if you're holding something jingly. But you were getting way too in your own head, and there was work to be done, lest you'd made Sans lug all that kibble from the stockroom for nothing. A deafening barrage of barks and whines greeted you from the second you opened the door to the dog room, and it brought a smile to your face. Oh my God, I know, you laughed. I know, I've been gone for like an hour. I could have been dead. Princess, a pit bull mutt and the biggest, whiniest baby you've ever seen in your life, certainly seemed to think so. She was the closest to the door and whimpering at you with her paws up against the chain link of her enclosure, wiggling so hard it rattled. All right, geez, I'm here now, aren't I? She looked right at you and let out a long, low whine that sounded so pathetic you had to laugh again. You want lunch first? Will that take the sting out of my betrayal? A loud bark was your answer from Princess, and from every other dog in the room. They didn't know a whole lot of human words, but anything food-related got picked up real damn quick. Okay, shush then, I'm on it. You all know the drill. You headed over to the big bags of kibble propped up against the door jamb, right where Sans had left them, and got to work. It used to be that you felt a little silly talking to the animals as if they could understand you, even when you and them were the only ones in the room. But those days were long behind you. They understood your tone of voice at least, so you were happy to chat with, or at, your furry wards about whatever popped into your head while you doled out their food. It was a step up from talking to yourself, which you'd definitely also done. You hadn't been exaggerating that no social life thing, but it's not like you'd ever felt lonely. Well, maybe not never, you muttered, nudging an eager little bulldog back with your foot to edge into his room and set down one of the bowls you were holding. But not like, seriously. I see everybody here all the time, plus adopters, and the cats, and you guys. That's plenty, right? You look down to realize you are being pointedly ignored, a little doggy face planted firmly in his food. Yeah, you're plenty. Good talk, Smoochie. If you weren't already pretty sure you were going to end up as a crazy animal person, this might have been the moment it hit you. You didn't really have time to dwell on that, though, not with the downright chilling screams that suddenly erupted from outside. Automatically, you found yourself headed for the noise, goosebumps prickling up on your skin from the awful quality of the sound. You just barely remembered to fasten the latch of the cage one-handedly behind you, before walking, jogging, running towards the lobby where it seemed to be coming from. And what were you going into that it could be heard from so far away in the building? There was a loud clatter and even more screaming, and when you finally made it through the door, you skidded to a halt. And your heart broke. The horrible, discordant screaming sound was coming from a dog. The poor thing was skinny, shaking, fur so matted and dingy that it couldn't even see through it. Every worst nightmare you'd ever had from those Sarah McLachlan commercials come to life. It looked like it had knocked over some chairs, trying to scrunch itself into a corner, and was cowering in a puddle of its own pee, and screeching every time it heard a noise. You didn't often see ones this bad, but it didn't hurt any less when you did. "Oh, baby, no," you whispered. "What happened?" You hadn't been talking to anyone in particular, so it startled you when you got an answer. He slipped his lead," you heard, and turned to see one of the new volunteers standing beside you, wide-eyed and holding a useless green rope in her hands. "I don't know, what do we do?" Glancing around, you suddenly realized that you were the most senior person in the room. Even with the trickle of onlookers drawn by the noise, everybody else was just hesitating at the edges of the lobby, nervous and unsure, while the poor animal wailed and shook in front of them. Right then. Up to you. Go get the vet. You told the volunteer and took a step forward, reaching out to take the lead from her fingers, only to watch a much bigger, paler hand close over the rope instead of your own. Sans took it, silently ghosting his broad body between you and the girl and heading straight for the dog. Your jaw nearly dropped. A million thoughts raced through your head at once. Where did he come from? What is he doing? Shouldn't you stop him? He barely has any experience. He's not even staff. But when you tried to say something, your throat was too tight and all that came out was, "Be careful." Sans didn't even turn. "It's fine." Just as soft-spoken as he ever was. "It's just a little spooked, that's all." You watched with bated breath as he knelt down right in front of the scruffy animal. It prompted a fresh bout of screaming that made you flinch, but Sans acted like he didn't even hear it. "Hey, bud, there's no need for all of that, is there?" The dog's mismatched ears flicked once, but immediately flattened back against his head. Sans kept talking. "It's good here. We'll take care of ya. It won't be like wherever you came from. Nobody here is gonna hurt ya." It was the most you'd ever heard him say at once, and the deep, sonorous quality of his voice was a surprise to you. His tone was slow and even, almost lulling. It was putting you at ease. So to see the poor dog responding the same way, his hackles lowering ever so slightly, and his shriek dying into a pitiful little cry, shouldn't have been so shocking. You were amazed anyway. "That's it, bud. There you go." Sans raised the rope, moving it carefully to the dog's head. Once he was leashed, it should be a little easier to coax him to the vet's exam room. He'd get checked out, bathed, shaved, fed, and settled into his own little kennel. Thank God you were under capacity right now. You'd really lose sleep if you had to turn this one away. As long as he was here, you could help him. But there you went, getting ahead of yourself again. The dog panicked at the very last second. He lunged forward, snapping his jaws shut on the closest target, Sans. Your gasp was loud in the tension-quieted room, chorused by others and even a muffled yelp from the receptionist. Everyone alarmed by the sight of Sans's blue hoodie caught in a semi-feral dog's muzzle. You had already taken several steps forward to do what you had no idea, when Sans just cinched the rope into a proper lead around the dog's neck with a triumphant "Gotcha," as if it hadn't just had a sharp set of teeth successfully come at him. You were speechless for several long seconds. Had he not noticed? Did the dog just graze him? Was he even bleeding? If he was, you'd want to drive him to the hospital just in case. You never knew what a strange dog could be carrying. And even if it was shallow, the stomach seemed like a terrible place to get bitten. And then the obvious hit you. The dog had lunged at Sans's abdomen. The abdomen he didn't have. Because he was a skeleton. Oh God, duh. Of course Sans was fine. That bite had never come anywhere near him. You wanted to physically facepalm, just a little bit, at your own apparent stupidity, but that would hardly be helpful right now. You managed to take some slight pleasure in knowing you weren't the only dumb human in the room that had the same thought, and then tried to forget it. "You okay, Sans?" "Yeah, we're fine," he answered easily. The dog may have disagreed, having unlatched himself from Sans's hoodie, and, when that last defensive bid had so totally failed, resigned himself to making heart-wrenching crying noises and continuing to cower. "He's not happy, but I got him." There were sighs of relief all around. You scanned the room, seeing the tension fade and normal activity start to hesitantly resume, and the volunteer girl still standing by the door. "What are you still— I said go get the vet!" You reminded her, maybe a little more sharply than you intended, because she squeaked and scurried off. You immediately felt a little bad about it. Seeing an animal in such bad shape for the first time wasn't easy, and not all newbies had the kind of brass ones Sans did. Sans, who suddenly turned to look right at you and said your name. Me? You wanted to kick yourself for saying that. There was only one of you at the whole damn shelter, but Sans didn't seem to care. "Yeah, come here. He'll probably chill out a little if he's got some food, right?" You were already moving forward again before you fully realized what he meant. The shiny metal bowl of kibble in your hand that you'd apparently run all the way here holding. Stars, what had that looked like? But if you were accidentally prepared, you probably shouldn't criticize yourself too hard. You knelt down next to Sans, moving carefully, but the skittish animal still yelped and scrabbled when he heard you coming. There was a blur of blue, and suddenly Sans's arm was between you and the dog. "It's okay, pal," he soothed. "You're fine. Stay cool. Just friends here. You want some food, don't you?" That was your cue. You placed the bowl on the floor and gently slid it over to the dog before pulling your hand back. The dog whined again, upset and unsure. You couldn't quite see with Sans's arm in the way, and straightened up to look over it, bracing just one hand against his humerus. The dog was blinded by his own matted fur, but he could clearly smell the kibble, and his nose found its way to the bowl, sniffing cautiously with his tail tucked between his legs. You slumped in relief when he took the first hesitant bite, and the ravenous second, third, fourth. Thank God. Sans seemed just as pleased, lowering his protective arm and looping the lead around his other hand, shortened for better control. He said your name again, and you turned. Even kneeling, you still had to look up.
"You should pet him," he said. "I don't think he'll bite again."
Glancing at the dog, you agreed, but also, why me? His one red eye met yours, gleaming with earnest sincerity.
"You're good at dogs,"
he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Grass is green, water makes stuff wet, you're good at dogs. Feeling unaccountably flattered, you reached out and carefully stroked your fingers along the dog's back. He flinched at the touch, but didn't stop eating or try to bite again, so you had high hopes for his adoption chances later on. You kept petting him, crouched on the floor of the shelter lobby next to a gentle giant of a skeleton, and watched the dog finish the whole bowl. "That's a good boy," you cooed. "You're gonna do just fine." It felt like you were there for a long time, but eventually you heard footsteps, and finally the vet arrived. He was flanked by a couple of other staff members, bigger guys who you knew had experience with nervous and aggressive dogs. Sans stood, and you with him, and you watched as he gingerly handed over the leash to one of them, and let them coax the dog forward. The vet was already looking him over even as they got the little guy moving, and you were relieved not to hear him point out anything that sounded too serious. Soon they had all filed out to take care of business, and it was just you and Sans left there in the lobby. Even the receptionist had fled for a coffee/need-a-breather-right-now break, and you didn't blame her. So that was intense.
"Yeah."
You turned more fully toward Sans and tried to catch his gaze. "You're okay, right?" you asked. "Like, really okay?" He looked at you like you'd said something bizarre.
"Said I was, didn't I?"
Well, people say a lot of things, and that was a lot, even for somebody who actually gets paid for it. You're good? Sans didn't look any less bemused.
"Yeah."
He didn't say anything else for several long moments. His single glowing pupil was cast down away from your face, and when you followed it, you saw... Oh, geez, your hand on his arm still. You pulled back immediately, feeling yourself go red and hoping he didn't notice. "Sorry." You definitely didn't squeak. "Sorry, that was... Oh no, your hoodie." Sans looked down and quickly spotted what you just had. 3 sizable holes torn into the bottom of his sweatshirt, right at the hem of the pocket. He picked at it, poking 2 thick, bony fingers straight through. Huh. He got you pretty good. You winced a little at the damp tear in the fabric. It was a jagged rip and pretty frayed. "I'm not sure that's going to be salvageable. Sorry." By the expression Sans kept fixing on you, you'd have guessed you were the most confusing human on the planet.
"What for?"
"The holes? That's your favorite jacket, isn't it?" You hesitated, realizing you didn't actually know that. Or at least you wear it all the time. I kinda guessed you just loved that thing.
"I do, but it's just a thing. Shit happens, you know?"
He shrugged.
"Besides, not like anybody got hurt, right?"
Right. Of course. That really was the most important thing. That and cleaning up the mess your new little friend had made of the lobby. You sighed just looking at it, but it wasn't about to fix itself, so you dove right in, picking up chairs and moving them to the side while you skirted around the puddle on the floor as best you could.
"Can I help?"
The gentle inquiry from Sans made you pause. The man got literally snapped at not 15 minutes ago at a place where they worked him like like a dog, without even having him on the payroll, and he still wanted to help? Sans really was something else. You could get the mop and bucket for me from the supply closet, you said lightly, pointedly not making it an order. And maybe finish feeding the dogs for me? I hadn't even gotten halfway through when all of this mess happened. I'm sure they're not too happy about that.
Yeah, sure.
But Sans seemed just a little nervous all of a sudden, his permanent grin looking more like a grimace while his eyelight darted quickly to one side.
Which dogs did you already...
You smiled. It was Tina's turn, but I didn't pick anything back up. Any cage that doesn't have a food bowl in it needs one. The skeleton's shoulders slumped in relief.
Okay, cool.
That was an easy way to remember what needed doing. He probably wouldn't have to come back and ask you again like he did some other times.
I'm on it.
You opened your mouth to thank him, but between one blink and the next, he was gone. Literally. Not even a motion blur, just gone. You turned to the reception desk to see if anybody else had just seen that, but of course it was still just you there. You and the mop and bucket that had just appeared where Sans had been standing when you looked away for no more than 2 seconds. Well, you announced to no one. That's new. No one was very appreciative of your dry and pithy wit, you were quite sure. You grabbed the mop and got to work on the glamorous task of wiping up urine, just one of the many hidden perks of your job, that you really did love, warts and all. You really weren't sure what to make of the new guy, but after today, you are damn well going to figure it out. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, hit the like button to let me know and subscribe to see what I make next. Links in the description lead to the original fic posted on AO3, as well as my Patreon and Ko-fi. If you like my stuff, please consider supporting me. Every little bit helps. Lastly, if you have a request for a recording, whether a one-shot or a series, let me know in the comments. I also do commissions, details of which are on my Patreon. So keep in touch. Bye!